The movie opens with a young woman hanging off a wrecking ball while arguing with a construction worker. Her name's Lucy, and she's a lawyer who specializes in environmental and historical cases. Lucy is protesting because a company is destroying the city's oldest theater to build a new skyscraper, and she refuses to accept it. She tries to reason with the construction workers, but they have nothing to do with the decision to destroy the building. They are just working. Lucy screams that she has the right, as any American, to express her freedom of speech, but the worker quickly loses his patience. Determined not to show fear, Lucy stands in front of the theater with her friends, Merle and John. The couple isn't as fearless as Lucy, but they follow her orders to lie down in front of the building and protest. They spread their yoga mats and lie down while people laugh at them. With the adrenaline coursing through his veins, John proposes to Merle, and she happily says yes. The wrecking ball suddenly stops, and Lucy cheers, believing she won, but it's the opposite. The police arrive to take her and her friends to jail. Lucy's parents, Ruth and Larry, have to bail her out of jail. The theater ends up being destroyed anyway, much to Lucy's disappointment. She doesn't understand what else she needs to do to get through to people. Her whole life she's spent trying to fight for lost causes, and she never wins. Her parents give her more bad news. The community center will also be destroyed to give way to a skyscraper. Lucy is disheartened, and goes back home to wallow in self-pity. At home, she eats by herself while she does some research about the new community center project. It is founded by a rich businessman called George Wade. In the meantime, George is at a fundraiser for a hospital. He's a very charismatic and handsome man in his mid-30s. Due to his money and influence, he attracts women wherever he goes. After his speech, his friend warns him that his older brother, Howard, wants to talk to him. George is annoyed by his brother's order, and begrudgingly leaves the party to meet him. Howard is mad at George because they lost some important business. Howard wants George to hire a better lawyer to help them with the environmental issues. George has the bad habit of always hiring women that aren't as interested in the job as they should be. George doesn't want to follow his brother's orders, but Howard insists. In the end, George has no other option but to look for a good lawyer. The following morning, Lucy shows up at George's company to talk to him about the community center. She introduces herself, and George is surprised to find out she went to Harvard. Lucy doesn't look like the stereotypical lawyer, with her long flowing skirts and loose-fitting blouses. As she starts talking about the community center, George recognizes her as the protester who is always standing in front of his wrecking balls. Lucy continues to explain to him why the community center is so important, but George is barely paying attention to her. His assistant shows up in a hurry to inform him he has another speech to give, and he needs help to come up with a good one. He invites Lucy to come with him, knowing she has a great oratory, and she agrees. It's awkward inside the car for a moment. Lucy wonders if they have a deal, and George offers her something else. He wants her to work for him as a chief counsel. Lucy isn't excited about the prospect of working for him. After all, he goes against everything she represents and believes. George promises if she agrees, he will save the community center, and she will have the means to make a difference. He makes a hefty proposal to her, and allows Lucy time for her to think about it. Later on, Lucy goes to the community center and makes her decision. She can't allow it to be destroyed. It's too important for her neighborhood. So she decides to accept the job. 2 weeks later, Lucy is working with George at Wade Enterprises. She's wearing a gray, formal dress and heels for work. Things are going well, and George is impressed with Lucy. Her mind works differently from other people, and her perspective is fresh. The issue is that he starts going to her for any questions, even personal ones like the best mattress for him to buy. One evening, he calls her at 2 in the morning for her to talk to a girl he wants to sleep with. Without any preamble, Lucy informs the girl that George isn't the best candidate, that he won't remember her name, and he's still married. The girl quickly comes up with an excuse to leave, much to George's surprise. Lucy is also taking care of his divorce, and the next morning they have a meeting with his wife. George arrives late at the meeting, much to Lucy's chagrin, and things don't go too well. Both George and his ex cheated while married, and she holds a grudge. Lucy manages to come up with a good agreement, but George interrupts her, willing to give his ex whatever she wants. Instead of being happy, his ex is angry, and takes her anger out on Lucy. She calls her names and throws water in her face. Lucy is rightfully upset that George dragged her into his mess. Not only that she isn't doing what she was hired to do, she's tired of him spending his money on meaningless things. She believes he should spend his money consciously and help people in need. George is too vain for that, and he's careless with his money. To make things worse, he takes Lucy to help him shop for new clothes. Once again, Lucy isn't happy that he's treating her like his assistant. She wants to be taken seriously. George doesn't understand that, because he's not passionate about what he does. He's an heir, and working for his family's company was his only option. He only cares about money and the power that it brings him. After arguing with him again, Lucy storms off. 2 months later, Merle and John get married. Lucy is the bridesmaid, but in the middle of the wedding, George calls her with an emergency. She leaves everyone to go to him. On her way to meet with him, still wearing her bridesmaid gown, she tries to talk to him on the phone. She's worried something happened with the deal they were trying to finish, but George doesn't answer. When she gets to his room, George is in his closet trying to decide what to wear to an event. Lucy can't believe he called her just for that. She's embarrassed that she left her friend's wedding, such an important day, to help a spoiled man choose his clothes. It's too much, even for her, so she resigns. George is shocked and calls her ungrateful. He gave her everything she wanted, only for her to leave him. Lucy's astounded that he thinks that, but she soon understands that George isn't the problem. She is addicted to feeling needed, so much so that she left her cell phone on during the ceremony. As for George, he complains that she made him addicted to her opinion, and now he can't choose anything without asking her first. Lucy leaves after arguing with him and calling him selfish. Later on, she calls her boyfriend to explain that she resigned, but her boyfriend cuts the conversation short and hangs up. The following day, Lucy goes on multiple interviews around the city to find another job. Her resume is very good, but George called every single company to warn them off of her. Lucy's speechless at his nerve and goes to see him. George is in the middle of a massage, not that Lucy cares. He explains that in her work contract, which she drew up, it says that she can't leave for at least a year, not unless she's fired. The contract has no loopholes, because Lucy was the one responsible for it. Not even her parents, who are very experienced lawyers, can find a way out for her. Her father, though, gives her an idea. She could make herself such a bad employee that George fires her. That same day, Lucy arrives very late for an important meeting with Howard. She acts obnoxiously, offending Howard's children and spitting gum on the floor. George understands what she's trying to do right away. If Howard isn't satisfied with her, he can fire her. He already did that with other lawyers that he deemed incompetent. Instead of being upset by her behavior, George finds it funny. Lucy is always a goody two-shoes, so it's good to see her acting differently. Howard, on the other hand, doesn't agree. He tries to be patient, because he knows Lucy is competent and a good lawyer. After the meeting, George drags Lucy away from the room to talk to her. He knows what she's doing, and he won't fire her for that. Lucy complains that her health is not well, and she doesn't get enough sleep, because he keeps calling her in the middle of the night. She's anxious and burned out. George feels bad for her. He genuinely cares for Lucy, and she ended up becoming a good friend. He doesn't want to lose her as an employee, but he understands it's inevitable. He agrees to let her go after she finds a proper replacement. Lucy celebrates and hugs him in thanks. For the first time, they touch each other and it's different. It brings them a sense of peace. When they separate, George's cufflink falls on the ground, and Lucy bends down to take it. Her hair gets stuck on his buckle while she's on her knees. Howard enters the restroom right at that time, and he immediately jumps to conclusions. The pair tries to look nonchalant, but with George's reputation, it's hard to convince Howard. The next day, Lucy goes with George to a construction site. There, she meets her parents and introduces them to George. He's happy to meet her parents after all the time working with her, but Ruth isn't as happy. She despises George and all he represents. Lucy takes after her mother in her passion for the environment and fighting for justice, something that George would never understand. He only cares about money. Larry invites Lucy to have some cake at their apartment, and George invites himself too. At her parents' building, Lucy takes George to her favorite place, the terrace. It has an amazing view of the beach and the neighborhood. Lucy loves her neighborhood and city. She would sit for hours on the terrace, people watching and thinking about her life. She confesses she had many arguments with her mother, and the terrace was her safe place. Ruth pushed Lucy to be the best she could be. First at school, with straight A grades, then in college. Lucy learned to be hardworking and obstinate. That's why she rarely gives up on what she believes in. Still, she believes Ruth will never be proud of her. George is shocked that a successful and smart woman like Lucy has insecurities. He sees her as this fortress of a woman, unshakable. It's good to see she has her vulnerabilities too. Later on, George is playing checkers with his friend Tony, but he can't concentrate. He admits that he's sad that he'll lose Lucy, and that he learned to count on her. He trusts her and admires her strong will. Tony believes that Lucy should go, because she's too much. She can't be controlled, and that's why George likes her so much. At the same time, Tony thinks Lucy will emasculate George and make him feel useless. George needs to be in control, not the other way around. The following day, Lucy and George start interviewing people for her position. Things don't go well again because of George's big mouth. He offends one of the candidates. They go out to eat together after that, to talk about the other candidates. As they talk, they don't realize that they are so in tune with each other that they are automatically picking the things the other doesn't like. After months of hanging out all day long, they got to know each other like the back of their hands. Not even Lucy's boyfriend knows as much about her habits as George does. Later on, Lucy receives a call from her boyfriend, and they end up breaking up. She's in tears and upset when George goes to her office. George cancels his appointment to stay with her and comfort her. Lucy explains to him that her boyfriend wants something different in life, and she can't follow him. He wants her to go on a boat trip with Greenpeace, and she doesn't want to. She doesn't like boats. George wonders if it's all boats that she doesn't like, and takes her to his yacht. There's music, champagne, and good food. Lucy keeps complaining about her love life. She believes the problem must be in her, because she always breaks up with her boyfriends. George listens to her and gives his opinion when it's needed. Lucy asks what is wrong with her, and he replies that she's intimidating. She might want to loosen up a bit sometimes. According to him, she has to change everything she is, just to keep someone by her side. They continue talking until they reach the topic of intimacy. George believes Lucy might be lousy in bed, but she disagrees. She promises him she's very good, even flexible. Out of nowhere, Lucy kisses George, taking him by surprise. She thanks him for listening to her and passes out in his arms. George takes her home with Tony and puts her on her couch. The next morning, Lucy has a massive hangover, and she's terrified that she slept with George. When they meet again, she wonders if something happened, and he implies that it did. Lucy freaks out a bit, but he quickly dismisses her worries. It was a great night, but not for the reason she was thinking. Despite being relieved, Lucy is also disappointed. She wonders if George isn't attracted to her, not knowing that he wonders the same. George is accustomed to women throwing themselves at him, but Lucy doesn't do that. He believes she has no interest in him beyond professionally. Later on, Lucy receives a surprise visit from a candidate that didn't apply. She doesn't believe the woman has what it takes to work at the company, but she decides to interview her anyway. The woman's name is June, and she's a pretty young woman. She flatters Lucy during the interview, and even quotes one of George's interviews. It's obvious she has come prepared, but Lucy still wants to check if she'll be a good fit. Before she has the chance of continuing their interview, George interrupts them. When he sees the pretty woman, he forgets all about Lucy. It's like she isn't even there. Lucy has to go out to solve some issues and decides to schedule another interview for June, but George decides to finish it. Lucy understands right away what's happening, and it bothers her more than she cares to admit. Seeing George with another girl, one that is smart and accomplished, stings. Suddenly, she can't bear the thought of being replaced by a younger, cuter lawyer. Before she leaves, Lucy wonders if they are still going to the baseball game. She twirls her hair in a failed try to be seductive, but June interrupts her, saying that she loves baseball. George once again ignores Lucy in favor of June. Not feeling the desire to be any more humiliated, Lucy leaves. During the game, Lucy covertly asks George's opinions on June, and he only has compliments. He found her intelligent, witty, and believes she will be a great fit. He mentions they went out for a drink and talked for hours. Lucy feels her heart clenching, but there's nothing she can do. Not only is George infatuated, but he also invited June to an outing with the company, and she isn't even hired yet. Lucy's bad luck only gets worse when she accidentally makes her baseball team lose the game. It's embarrassing and humiliating. George laughs at her. The next day, there's a tennis game. George and June play together against Lucy and another employee, and it's obvious June wants to impress George. She does that at the expense of Lucy. They start competing with each other, leaving George and the other player aside. It's a tight match, but June manages to hit Lucy in the head. Later on, Lucy watches as June interacts with George. The two of them are two peas in a pod, and there's nothing Lucy can do. She feels down and jealous of June. When she's upset, Lucy eats a lot, but that's not a good idea. On their way back, George can't stop talking about June. Lucy starts feeling her stomach hurt. She knows she will need to go to the bathroom as soon as possible, but unfortunately for her, there's traffic and it starts raining. George tells her to just go in the car, but she refuses. It's embarrassing. George has an idea to help her out and races out of the car, pulling Lucy with him. She slips on the floor, twists her ankle, and George has to take her on his back. George offers money to an RV owner for Lucy to use the bathroom, and they allow her. Everyone can hear what's happening in the bathroom, so it's very awkward. The traffic starts moving and their car is stuck. Some time later, Lucy finishes, and the RV drops them off in a parking lot. Lucy is embarrassed, but George keeps cracking jokes to make the mood better. He asks for a helicopter to take them back, and it's an amazing experience. Lucy and George talk about the future, and how her 2 weeks' notice is almost over. She explains that after the last fundraiser, she will help June settle, and then she will be gone from his life forever. George doesn't seem so happy about it, and neither does Lucy. Despite their differences, they make a good team. Lucy is focused and rational, while George is laid back and goes with the flow. They complement each other, not that they realize it. June continues to come between them on purpose. George invites her to an event that initially he would have gone to with Lucy. When she finds out through June, Lucy gets upset and jealous again. To make things worse, everyone seems to think June is amazing and nice, while Lucy is seen as a general. At the end of her shift, she hastily leaves. George wonders if she wants a lift for the event, but she denies it. He notices she's treating him coldly, and he doesn't understand why. On his way to the fundraiser, George receives a call from Howard saying that they will need to destroy the community center, despite saying they wouldn't. George tries to change Howard's mind, but he's unbent. Howard even threatens to fire him if he doesn't finish the deal. There's no other option for George but to accept, despite the promise he made to Lucy. Later on, Lucy arrives at the fundraiser alone. She looks beautiful in her long gown. When he sees her, George is shocked by her beauty. He compliments her on her looks, and Lucy feels a flutter in her chest. She finally managed to show him that she can be beautiful too. George is speechless. They stare at each other for a long time before June interrupts their moment. Not only that, but she unknowingly informs Lucy that the community center will be torn down, and she needs help revising the contract. All of Lucy's good mood and infatuation with George go out the window the moment she hears that. Lucy drags him away to argue with him, but there's nothing he can say to change the fact that he broke his word. Lucy is very hurt that he would do that to her, even after all she told him. George isn't feeling great either. Lucy leaves after informing him that for the first time in a year, she doesn't like him at all. George is in no mood to party anymore. After the party, he and June go back together to the hotel. June kisses him before leaving, and George invites her to his room. June invites him to play strip chess with her, and George eagerly agrees. In the meantime, Lucy can't stop thinking about what George is doing, and decides to go after him to confront him. She has a free pass to his hotel room, and has no idea what she's about to find when she gets there. June and George are in their underwear. It's very awkward, and Lucy wants to disappear. She can't believe she was so stupid to believe George changed in the time they spent together. He's still the same vapid, womanizing man who sleeps with his lawyers. She's disappointed, and George notices. It surprisingly hurts him to see her disappointment. After embarrassing herself even more, Lucy storms off before things get weirder. Sadly for her, she can't stop talking when she's nervous. She rambles about a random person that is waiting for her at her apartment. George feels bad. Lucy goes away with tears in her eyes. She shows up at Merle's place, crying. She feels ridiculous that she's crying over a man like George. She can't believe she fell for his charm, just like all the other women before. Lucy always prided herself on being rational and firm in her beliefs. Suddenly, all she can think about is George, and what he's doing with June. She would never admit it, but a small part of her wishes she could be more like June. Outgoing, fun, and cute. These are the characteristics that attract George, he said so himself. Merle comforts her, and Lucy feels better. There's a farewell party for Lucy at the company, but George doesn't show up. June does. She comes close to Lucy to thank her for everything she did, but then she points out that Lucy is taking the company's stapler with her. Lucy has had enough of her, and says that she's glad to be leaving after working 18 hours a day for George. June makes an offhanded comment that she can do the same, though she is able to separate her personal and professional life. Lucy makes a sarcastic comment about the previous night. June gets angry, and the two of them start arguing about the stapler. People start laughing, and George arrives. He takes Lucy away from June and drags her to another room. George tries talking about the previous night, but Lucy questions him about the community center. George gets upset with her because she doesn't want to talk about the tension between them. He subtly points out that she might have feelings for him, leaving Lucy speechless. She doesn't want to go through the humiliation and tries to leave, but George wants to confront her. Lucy once again accuses him of breaking his promise to her, and George agrees that he did. He made a mistake, something that Lucy seems incapable of making. Not only that, he says that she believes she's perfect, and that's probably the reason why all the men in her life left her. He calls her intolerable and boring. It's like a slap in her face. It hurts more than anything anyone could ever tell her. George immediately regrets his words, but by then, it's too late. She has to take a deep breath not to cry in front of him. And thankfully, George leaves. Lucy goes back to her parents' apartment, sick and brokenhearted. The day of the destruction of the community center arrives. George is anything but happy. He remembers how important the center is, not only to Lucy, but to many citizens who were born and raised there. Lucy's father wants her to go protest with him, but she's tired. She's tired of always fighting and not getting anywhere. In the end, money and power are all that matter. She goes to work at the legal aid, doing something that will help people out. Surprisingly, George shows up there looking for her. Lucy is surprised to see him there. After all, she believed he would have forgotten her by now. She gives him the cold shoulder, but he keeps trying to talk to her. He reads his speech to her, in which he says that they couldn't knock the center down because he gave his word to someone important. He mentions that the building reminds him of that person. At first glance, it looks boring and old-fashioned, but after getting to know it, it's beautiful and unique. Lucy starts tearing up with his declaration that he wants to be with her. He also confesses he didn't sleep with June. Lucy doesn't know what to say to him. She's still freshly wounded by his callous words. He calls her out on things that she worked hard to accomplish, to make her parents proud. It's hard to be perfect, because she's under people's scrutiny all the time. George leaves, and Lucy starts crying. Her co-worker suggests she goes after him. She runs to him and hugs him. She starts rambling that she will change and meet him halfway, but he shuts her up. He declares his love for her, and she says she loves him too. Before they can kiss, he mentions that he resigned from his position, and he's poor, though his version of poor is less wealthy. At last, they kiss. Later on, Lucy orders food for more than one person for the first time, and she's very happy.